Free your mind now. Be part of People's Pan-African Parliament, the Pan-African Pyramid Debate with your speaker, Andrew Irumba Katusabe.
And welcome aboard, welcome to another edition of the Pan-African Pyramid Show here at Fairway Hotel. My name is Andrew Irumba Katusabe, your speaker as usual. And tonight we are discussing how prepared is Uganda's and Africa for the fourth industrial revolution. We all know that there's been first, second, third, and now we're in the fourth industrial revolution. But how ready, how prepared is Africa to partake of the advantages of that revolution? The fourth industrial revolution is the trend towards automation and data exchange in manufacturing technologies and processes, which include cyber physical systems or CPS, Internet of Things, IoT, Industrial Internet of Things, cloud computing, cognitive computing, and artificial intelligence. A part of this phase of industrial change is the training of the technologies like artificial intelligence, gene editing, to advanced robotics that actually blur the lines between the physical, digital, and the biological worlds. The fourth industrial revolution, or VIR, or the Industrial 4, conceptualizes a rapid change to technology, industries, and societal patterns and processes in the 21st century due to the increasing interconnectivity and smart automation. The fourth industrial revolution, ladies and gentlemen, was actually first introduced by a team of scientists developing a high-tech strategy for the German government. Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, WEF, introduced the phrase to a wider audience in 2015 article published by Foreign Affairs, Mastering the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It was the 2016 theme of the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, Klosters, Switzerland. On 10th October 2016, the forum announced the opening of its Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco. This was also subject and title of Schwab's 2016 book. Schwab includes in this fourth era technologies that combine hardware, software, and biological, and emphasizes advances in communication and connectivity. Schwab actually expects this era to be marked by breakthrough in emerging technologies in fields such as robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, quantum computing, biotechnology, the Internet of Things, the Industrial Internet of Things, decentralized consensus, fifth generation wireless technologies, 3D printing, and fully autonomous vehicles. The fourth industrial revolution marks the beginning of the imagination age. Now, Professor Evaristo Benyera, an associate professor of African politics at the University of South Africa, argues in his book titled The Fourth Industrial Revolution and Recolonization of Africa, released in 2021, he argues that the process of accelerated automation of traditional manufacturing and industrial practices via digital technology will serve to further marginalize Africa within the international community. The author argues that the looting of Africa that started with human capital and the natural resources now continues unabated via data and digital resources looting, developing on the notion of coloniality of data. The fourth industrial revolution is postulated as the final phase, which will conclude Africa's peregrination towards recolonization. Global cartels, networks of coloniality, and tech multinational corporations have actually turned big data into capital, which is largely unregulated or poorly regulated in Africa, as the continent lacks the strong institutions necessary to regulate the mining of data. Written from a colonial perspective, Professor Benyera employs three analytical pillars of coloniality of power, knowledge, and the being. All the slaves, he writes, past, present, and future, and those slaves who actually don't know that they are slaves, as the fourth industrial revolution consolidates and takes effect, Humanity and other forms of life are undergoing irresistible, irreversible, and universal social, economic, and legal transformation based on the massive appropriation of social life through data extraction. In the fourth industrial revolution, capitalism took a new turn, away from focusing on materials and goods toward services. Materials and services. The 4IR is actually essentially a services revolution brought about the merging of nanotechnology, biotechnology, information communication technology, ICT, among others, in the process, blurring the traditional boundaries between the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds. This resulted in new ways of thinking and doing, aided by the vast amounts of information and data harvested from people's daily lives, hence the Internet of Things, among many technology-enabled services. In the 4IR, the evolution of episteme has taken another turn, and its relation to being which once again excluded the black people, broadly defined, with a history of exclusion, slavery, colonialism, and perpetual denial into personhood. Black people are still struggling to be part of the thinking being and always grapple with how to enter the realm of knowledge production. Stated differently, black people, the majority of them African, lack the right to rights. The fourth industrial revolution will undoubtedly complicate the case for the black people to enter and be accepted into the realm of humanity. In the fourth industrial revolution, the thinking and cognitive space as new entrants, transhumans, robo-humans, and other forms of enhanced humanity who occupy an ontological position higher than that of black people. The fourth industrial revolution, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, if Africa is not well prepared, it can be another sad moment in the life of black people as they slide lower and lower on the ontological ladder, whose apex is occupied by the white Caucasian males and bottom is occupied by the black women. Knowledge production is shifting from the human being towards online entities that are now playing the role of cognitive thinking, imagination, and creativity. Intelligence is now artificial, and IA is now responsible for the creation of a new reality to which we all belong to. Ladies and gentlemen, who are those responsible for creating this new reality? Who are the new philosopher kings? The new philosopher kings are the emerging tech oligarchy that is replacing the political oligarchy. They own and control big data, artificial intelligence, online communities, and the online economy. They harvest data, process it, commodify, and hence make data a capital. Like all forms of capital, data extraction is not only unethical, but brutal and unforgiving. Data is capital, the new gold and oil. Like oil and gold before it, data is power, and like all forms of power, it is deployable in political spaces in order to predetermine, influence, and preempt political decisions. Indeed, democracy and many other political processes, this in turn, ladies and gentlemen, will result in the entrenchment of coloniality, especially in Africa, where there are weak accountability institutions and unethical and unjust leadership. So I ask, the big question is, how prepared is Uganda and Africa for the fourth industrial revolution? Ladies and gentlemen, to discuss this topic here tonight is none other than Mr. Sserubiri, a young entrepreneur, a co-founder and CEO of eMaisha Pay. It's a technology system, and he's also a great Pan-Africanist. If you could give him a round of applause. We will also be joined by Mr. James Kashaya. He's also right there. If you could also give him a round of applause. Is Africa and Uganda in particular in really fighting for this space, the fourth industrial revolution.
I'm Sserubiri. I'm first of all happy to be back here. I think I was last here 5 years ago.
After a very long time. Give him a round of applause. He's actually one of the pioneers of Pan-African.
So we are discussing the fourth industrial revolution, and I think it will be very unfair for me to discuss the fourth industrial revolution without giving the historical context. so because when we discuss the fourth industrial revolution, it means we have had the third, we have had the second, and also the first. So I wanted to first give the historical context so we can continue with the fourth industrial revolution. So how did the fourth industrial revolution start? So humanity has gone through different revolutions, economic revolutions that have had impact in the political, social, and economic sphere. And so the first revolution that we had, which had global significance, we call it the first industrial revolution, which we can call the steam revolution. So the steam revolution started with the discovery of the steam engine, which I think was in 1712, with the starting in England. So we can say England was the mother of Western capitalism. And so the steam engine revolutionized the production in the industries. And so with the mass production in industries, we saw the mass exodus of people moving from rural areas to urban areas to provide labor to provide labor as a service. And so we had increase in production, and then we had massive movement of people moving to urban areas. We had urbanization, and that was starting around 1750 in England. And so, but that revolution, the steam engine, starting in England, had significant impact on the world. And how? It created two challenges for the capitalists who were running the industries. The first challenge was the challenge of raw materials. How could they access raw materials to power the industries? And then two, after accessing the raw materials and producing, how could they sell their produce? Meaning they had the challenge of market. How did they deal with these two challenges? And that's how they dealt with the two challenges was the pivotal moment in human history. To deal with the issue of raw materials, one, they turned to slaves. And so we saw the intensification of slaves, where the slaves could produce the raw materials that could power the industrial complex. And then two, they turned to colonies. And so that's when we saw the colonization of the world. And so colonialism becomes a purely economic endeavor, where the colonialists were looking for raw materials to power the industries. And then from the raw materials, then we look at how did they approach the issue of the market. So they wanted to open up the market because the European market was not enough what they were producing. And so they turned to wider markets with the different explorations. So one, they turned to China. So the question was, how do they open up Chinese trade? And so the British fought the Opium War with China in 1839 to 1842 to open up Chinese to trade to the British merchants. And so the Chinese Opium War was a war where the British capitalists were trying to open up Chinese markets so they could be able to sell their commodities. And then the second market they looked at was Japan. So why they looked at the markets in Asia? Because these were a bit more advanced markets, and so they could provide the market for their produce, unlike the colonies in Africa, in South America, and everywhere, because these were not yet developed enough to provide the market their produce, so they turned them source of raw materials. And so they went to Japan. And in 1853, a man called Matthew Perry arrived at Japan with a large warship and advanced technology that the Japanese had never seen. He wanted to sign a treaty with the Japanese such that the Japanese could open up their market and trade with the Western world so they could sell their produce. And then from 1853, there was an intense debate in Japan whether they should open up or they could close up. And in 1868, the Japanese agreed that the best solution was for them to open up their market, adopt the Western model, and participate in the same model. And so that's when we saw what we call the Meiji Restoration in 1868. So the Meiji Restoration was a period under Emperor Meiji where the Japanese opened up to Western ideas, and then we saw massive industrialization in Japan, and Japan became a market for Western products and also became a global power after opening up. And so the period of the first industrial revolution was more on the industrial complex, the capitalists trying to do mass production, looking for raw materials from all over the world, and also looking for market from everywhere else, apart from the colonies. And then, so from that period, right from 1950 to 1870, and so that's the period that defined the first industrial revolution, or what we call the steam age. And so from 1870, something phenomenal happened. For over 120 years, England was the base of Western capitalism. That's why even when you see people who are writing about capitalism were mainly from the Western world. So look at Adam Smith, writing from Scotland, and then we had the Frederick Engels who are writing about the condition of the working class in England. And then because that, they were trying to study the realities that existed in Europe at the time. And in 1870, we had the power shift. So during the period from the American independence of 1776, the Americans were preparing themselves. And then also, capitalism had spread from England to the Americas. And so in 1870, the Americans had built internal capacity, and they wanted also to compete on the global scale. And so from the steam age that saw the replacing of human and animal labor with the machines, then we entered another phase which we call the technological phase in 1870. So what was phenomenal about the second industrial revolution that started in 1870? That for the first time in human history, we saw the merger of industrial capital with financial capital. So that's where the bankers who had unlimited access to capital and the industrialists merged to create what we call monopoly capital. And so that monopolism, and also we had a shift from traditional slavery to traditional colonialism to now global imperialism. And that's what Lenin writes about in his book, Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. So that's the merger of industrial capital with financial capital to create monopoly capital. And so the new phase was now more of, it ceased to be colonialism, it turned into imperialism. And then the new actors emerged on the global scene. Where empires were built by kings, by politicians, now empires were being built by non-state actors. And these are the ones who had the access to capital, or had the monopoly of capital. And so the second industrial revolution started. And so with the second industrial revolution, we saw rapid advance in scientific discoveries. We saw electricity, we saw the discovery of electricity, and then we saw things like oil, gas, the automobile industry, then the planes. So that was the age of the second industrial revolution, which went from 1870 to, I think, towards the beginning of the First World War in 1914. And so that's the period of the second industrial revolution. And then from the second industrial revolution, which was the technological age, which created many changes in the world, in the city of technology, in industries, and then we had mass production, intensity of production on a global scale. Then we entered the third industrial revolution, which started around in the mid-20th century, around 1970. So the third industrial revolution we call the electronics age. So that's when we saw the telecommunication industry emerging. That's when we saw high precision automation in industries because of programmable logic that could power robots to be able to replace human labor. And then we saw the mergers of technological companies that were creating things based on all the semiconductors and then also electronics gadgets. And so that's the age of the electronics age, which started from, I think, around 1970. And so from that's what was creating the foundation for the fourth industrial revolution. Because these devices that we have created were the ones that made it possible for the fourth industrial revolution to emerge. Now from the third industrial revolution, which is the electronics age, the telecommunications age, from the third, then we entered the fourth industrial revolution, which I call the internet revolution. So the internet revolution was prepared by the revolutions that have been explained. And so the internet was only possible because there was infrastructure that was laid that made the fourth industrial revolution possible. And so what defined the fourth industrial revolution as the introduction from the speaker is the rise of the internet, big data, social media, smartphones, internet of things, virtual reality, blockchain, and then quantum computing, and all these new technologies that are coming because of the rise, because of the infrastructure set in place by the third industrial revolution. And so I will go to now the core, which is the fourth industrial revolution. So we look at 1994, and Netscape was launched. Netscape was the first web browser. So that web browser made it possible for people to access information on the web, people to look for web pages, and then access information, anyone who could have access to the internet and also the computer. And then in 1998, Google was launched. And then Google became the game changer. That for the first time there was, world information was brought together on the same highway, that anyone, anywhere in the world with access to internet could access the books that were restricted by certain people back in the days. That I could go to the internet and I read any book that I want to read. Back in the days, it was not possible. So it kind of equalized the environment that people could have access to information, and that's why it was called the information age. And then from Google, then in the same year, 1998, PayPal was launched. And why is PayPal significant? Because if I want to buy something in China, then the question is, how am I going to pay the Chinese? Because I have my bank account, but my bank account is not connected to the Chinese bank account, and the Chinese in China, so there's no way of me sending him a check. And then PayPal comes and changes that with digital payments. So why is this significant? Because it enabled people from anywhere around the world to be able to access resources, or even when they are paid for. That seated in Kampala, only this year I bought 50 books from Amazon. How have I bought 50 books from Amazon? Amazon doesn't accept mobile money. Amazon doesn't accept cash. But because I can use my debit card and then use the digital infrastructure, the payment infrastructure, I'm able to pay a bookseller anywhere in the world using that infrastructure. And so that becomes significant because it was a big push in a global trade. And so PayPal, the launch of PayPal becomes significant in the fourth industrial revolution. And then we had the rise of social media. And then for the first time, humans everywhere were able to access humans all over the world. That I could communicate with someone in the United States, someone in Germany, someone in France, anywhere in the world. Whatever we are communicating, that is the subject of discussion. But at least the first step is that I can communicate with someone across the ocean. And then for the first time, smaller businesses could compete with big businesses. When we started our Rabbit Joint, which we called Kampala Grilled Rabbit, we were able to use social media to market our product. And we had thousands of customers coming. And for the first time, without going to any media station, which would charge me exorbitantly, I was able to spend less money and reach thousands of people instantly. And so that was an equalizer, because businesses could do much more, taking advantage of that global infrastructure. And then another significant period was the launch of the iPhone in 2007. That was the first smartphone worth the name. There is a debate around the smartphone that was first launched by IBM in 1994, but for the first time, the smartphone with an operating system as we know it, that was launched in 2007 by Steve Jobs, the iPhone. And then with the launch of the iPhone, and with Apple opening up its operating system, developers around the world were able to create innovations and then launch them and reach to customers around the world. And I've been a witness of that when we launched our product called MyFarm. It's so interesting that 90% of our market base was in the United States and Canada. And we had never left Uganda. But because there was an infrastructure, then I could be able to reach millions of customers without leaving my location. And so the smartphone becomes a game changer. That it empowered millions of people around the world with computers in their pockets. And then they could do so much with their devices. And so those are the different stages that the fourth industrial revolution has gone through. Then why does the fourth industrial revolution matters? The fourth industrial revolution matters. Why? Our president always calls the internet an enabler. And he's right. The internet is an enabler. It powers economies. And so we look at key sectors of the economy. We look at agriculture, we look at education, we look at financial inclusion, we look at employment. Look at agriculture. I'm a farmer. I've been in the space force ever since I finished university. What are the key challenges faced by farmers in Uganda? There are three key challenges faced by farmers. One, extension services. Two, market linkages. Three, access to finance. Those are the three fundamental challenges farmers face in Uganda. How does the fourth industrial revolution help in solving these three critical challenges?
That's where we are going now.
Yes, so in agriculture, a farmer in Chiriadongo, in rural Chiriadongo.
That was Mr. Kashaya's word.
Yes.
That
rural farmer with the phone is able to call our call center, call the Chirimo call center, and is able to access information instantly. That farmer is able to know when it's going to rain, is able to know the right inputs to use, is able to know the right variety to use in his locality, is able to know the price of different commodities in different markets without leaving his house. And so with our farmers call center that we launched, we have been able to serve over 800,000 farmers. And those farmers, powered with their simple phones, they are able to achieve much more. And so the challenge that the government has been grappling with of extension services, where it has invested over 800 billion Uganda shillings since 2016, and then even up to now, over 80% of the farmers are not able to access extension services. With the fourth industrial revolution, that becomes possible. With the fourth industrial revolution, a farmer with his phone is able to access markets on different platforms and is able to sell whether in Kenya, in Rwanda, all over the world without leaving his locality. Because there are innovations that are providing such infrastructure for the farmer to do that. With the farmers have not been able to access over 83% of financing needs of smallholder farmers across Africa go unmet. Irrespective of the fact that we have banks, microfinance, and all of these financial institutions in place. But the farmer has been left out, and small businesses have been left out. Why? Because there are no records for the farmers. With the fourth industrial revolution, we are able to leverage alternative data. We are able to look at the trends that are happening in the agricultural sector. We are able to analyze weather data. We are able to analyze the behavior of the customer. And then we are able to credit score those farmers, and they have access to finance. And so that's why the fourth industrial revolution matters. That's why it matters to the African economy. Because for the first time we can have solutions that are not even coming from the government, but they are coming from young people like me and you. Because we can leverage this infrastructure to create solutions that serve the needs of our people. Look at education. The fourth industrial revolution equalizes education. It makes it possible for any young person who can have access to a smartphone and internet to have education from across the world. You can have access to education from Harvard, you can have access to education from Oxford, from California, from anywhere around the world. You can have access to that education. And so that becomes an equalizer. Because gone are the days when those skills could be only accessed by the rich because they can afford good schools. But right now with my smartphone, I can go to the internet and subscribe to a course, pay $100, and then have the best courses on nanotechnology or artificial intelligence or digital skills, and then be able to compete with everyone around the world. And so it makes education universal, and it equalizes it. Then we look at financial inclusion, which I also talked about when I was explaining the farmers. Small businesses, farmers, many people around the world are able to access financial services because of the alternative data that has emerged. And so the fourth industrial revolution makes that possible. And then look at employment. There are new jobs that have emerged, and it's estimated that by 2030 we shall have 230 million jobs in the digital economy in Africa. So the challenge of education, 230 million digital jobs in Africa. And so the challenge of employment, which is a very big challenge, because every single year we are churning out graduates, but no one is asking where are they going? What are they going to do? The economy is becoming digitized, automated.
These 230 million jobs are for the entire African continent.
Yes, 230 million jobs across the sub-Saharan Africa. And so we have been wondering where these graduates are going to go to look for jobs. The industries that used to employ massive numbers of people, now industries are getting automated. And so the tasks that were done by humans are now done by machines. And so you find that even when industrialization looked as the savior of Africa, and so we thought, so the economists reasoned back then, that if we can have industries coming to Africa, then they can employ thousands of people. That is in history. Because industries are going to come here, and they are going to automate processes because they want efficiency and competitiveness, and so the jobs will not be created. But what is the alternative? The digital economy offers new jobs. And so young people can be reskilled such that they can take advantage of the new digital jobs that are emerging within the African economy. And so that's why the fourth industrial revolution matters. So then the question becomes, is Africa ready for the fourth industrial revolution? So we look at the fundamentals of the fourth industrial revolution. How can a country, a continent, prepare itself for the fourth industrial revolution? Besides the pessimism that my good speaker was talking about, I'm very optimistic. I understand that our situation currently is very sad, but I also believe that there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so I look at the fourth industrial revolution with optimism, not pessimism. And so what are the core fundamentals a country should look at? Therefore, the physical capital, the human capital, the competitiveness of the country, and investment in research and development. So we go to the physical capital. what is the current status of Africa? So, though on a global comparison, we are doing bad, but for the last 20 years, we have made fundamental progress on the continent. If it's a comparative analysis, then the situation is terrible. But if we look at Africa as itself and look at what has been happening for the past 60 years since independence, then we have made some fundamental progress.
Improvement pattern.
Exactly. But if you look at the trends that have been emerging for the last 20 years, then you see that there is some hope. And so if we have a situation that 50% of our adult Africans have access to the internet, over 50% have access to smartphones, and then many are using mobile money to do transactions, then there is a whole infrastructure that is being laid out to build a sustainable digital economy. And so, looking at the physical capital, I can say we are making fundamental progress to lay down the digital infrastructure that will power the fourth industrial revolution. Then we look at the human capital. When we look at the human capital, we are not doing well as a continent. A lot is lacking. Because as you can see, we need a concentration of talent. We need a concentration, a critical mass of digital skills to be able to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. But then when you look at, for example, I looked at the software engineers we have in Africa. I compared Africa with India and China because of the proportions in population. So we have maybe 1.1 billion, India maybe 1.3 billion, China maybe 1.4 billion. And so when you look at the number of software engineers we have in Africa, we just have 716,000 software engineers, which is just 2.7% of the global contribution. And then India has, for the last 50 years, has positioned itself well to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. And so it has created a critical mass of the needed talent if the country is to leverage on that digital infrastructure. And that's why you see it has 5.8 million software engineers projected to reach 10 million by 2030. And by that time, it will have the highest number of software engineers in the world. And then also followed by China. And so the human capital, we need to encourage more young people to get the digital skills so that they can take advantage of the opportunities that have emerged in the digital economy. And because even if I talked about the 230 million jobs that are going to be created in the digital economy, if we don't have a critical mass of the digital skills, then what will happen, those jobs are going to go to outside countries. Things like outsourcing. I think the graduates of telecommunication engineering are witnesses. They started telecommunication engineering. When they were done with the courses, then the companies outsourced all the services to India and China. And so you had telecom companies outsourcing their services, and then the telecommunication engineers were left jobless. And so if we don't prepare a critical mass of talent, then even the 230 million jobs will be taken by Indians and Chinese, Indonesian, Pakistanians, who are preparing themselves for the fourth industrial revolution. Then we look at competitiveness. How competitive are we? If we want to take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution, we must be competitive. We must have our young people building companies. We must have our young people innovating, initiating ideas and building those ideas. We must have the ability to attract investment from all over the world. We must have the ability to file for patents so that we can grow the value of our companies. And then so all of these things will make a country competitive. And so when it comes to competitiveness as a continent, we are not doing well. So that's why I gave the comparison of Africa and India. So we need to become competitive. We need to encourage our young people to be innovative, and even the public sector, the government must come up with initiatives that are intentional to make the continent competitive or the country. Then I looked at another case study, Estonia. Estonia is a country in Europe.
As you wind up, I hope you are making a conclusion in your presentation.
So Estonia is a country in Europe with 1.3 million people. Very small country. But then you see that small country, 1.3 million people, has 1,300 tech companies. And then when you look at the GDP, if you look at GDP of tech companies per the population, then you can see like you have one tech company per 1,000 people in the country. And so then you see the investment it has attracted, you see the employment, the revenue it has generated for the government. And so a small country that has appreciated the opportunities that lie within the digital economy is doing much better than even the biggest countries in Africa like Nigeria.
Now that's why I want, okay, first finish that then I ask you, because you're talking about continent.
Yes.
Now when you compare Africa and then specifically Uganda, in terms of competitiveness, when you talked about 230 million jobs in Africa, really, what portion is it that Uganda, according to the preparedness we are having, what is it you think that we can compete and take? And then also, when you compare the continents, the readiness and the competitiveness you see in other continents, Europe and so on, do you think we are ready? Because that's the main, that's the gist of the matter. Are we ready? Because when you also say, if you want us to isolate Africa and talk about the development pattern of Africa as a continent in isolation, it means we are not competing with the world. But remember, we said this is a global village, and the fourth industrial revolution is about the world. It's not about Africa, it's about the world. When you look at the development patterns, and you look at the competitiveness of the continents, where are we located?
Yes, I get you. So
should we celebrate?
You get to appreciate. For example, if today I have 1,000, Uganda may have 1 million, but for me I have 1,000. Then I'll wake up next week, I work hard, and you find that I have 100,000. Uganda at that time may have 10 million. For me I have 100,000. But remember, what is my growth from that, from between 1,000 to 100,000? So when I compare myself with the Yoruba, I'm doing bad off. But if I look at my growth, that I've moved from 1,000, and now the next week I have 100,000, then I say I've made it. But then I don't stop there. I say, okay, now I have 100,000. But how is the Yoruba making 10 million?
Yes.
Then I start comparing myself, say, okay, what is the Yoruba doing different that I'm not doing? And so that's the case of Africa. So you ask, okay, we have made the progress.
So now here is the dilemma. Here is the dilemma. You have grown back, you have 100,000, I have 10 million. The dilemma is, when we go to the market, we go in the same market and buy from the same market.
I acknowledge that I've made some progress. But in comparison with Estonia, a small country of 1.3 million people, to be competing with the continent of 1 billion people, then I'm doing badly off. So I accept that I've made some progress, but I like, okay, I think I need to do better. So I started and I said, what is Yoruba doing right? And so I said, okay, what is it that we are going to do as a continent? And to be able to take advantage of this, let us skill the population so we can build the human capital. Let us build the infrastructure so we can build the physical capital. Let us come up with initiatives, with the policies that can enable the population to be competitive, that can enable the continent to be competitive.
When you look at the investment of...
In 2021, last year, we made progress from enough capital compared to what everyone else is raising. And so, that's when we ask, how are these countries doing it? How are they able to attract investment in their tech startups? So yes, we have made progress, as you can see in the black bars. We have made progress from $560 million to $5.2 billion. Yes, are we ready? We say yes, we are making progress, but slow pace. We need to be intentional. And so when you look at our spend, Uganda spends $140 million in research and development. And then the whole of Africa, our spend in terms of GDP is 0.5%, below the global average of 2.2%. And so when it comes to that, we are still lacking, and we are not making progress. And so how do we take advantage of this? We must be intentional. So I gave the case study of Uganda. One, we must build a strong startup ecosystem. By a startup, we mean innovations that are creating new business models, that are creating new ideas. And so how do we build an ecosystem that works for them? How do we make it possible for them to raise capital within Uganda and even outside Uganda? How do we give them different incentives such that they can be able to stand? How do we give them tax holidays? How do we create a regulatory environment that favors them to flourish? We can't start taxing them. We cannot start introducing digital taxes when the ecosystem is still in its infant state. So we have to be intentional. We have to come up with the policies that catalyzes the innovation ecosystem and then empower young people to look at innovation as an alternative to employment. Then two, how do we nurture these innovations such that they can be able to generate employment and create wealth for the country? And then I leave an ambitious plan by 2025. If we can be on the move and if we can say that we are ready, then we should be targeting creating 1,000 tech startups. So when you looked at Uganda, we had 250. We have 235 tech companies in Uganda. If we can create those tech companies and they can be able to pool in the economy $500 million, and then we can also make it easy for them to file for patent so they can protect their intellectual property.
If I was to give one quick answer, is Africa ready for fourth industrial revolution? The answer is no.
We are not ready.
We are not. Hey, and I'll show you what I mean. Don't get me wrong. I'm somebody who survived a men's prison. I'm the most optimistic person there is in this world. But then after being a citizen of the world, I definitely have, I take seriously the realities of my situation. And so if I look at the check number 1, by the way, I'm looking at this from a perspective of an engineer, a technologist. And so when you look at the stages of technological development, back in the day, the whole world was doing subsistence farming. Subsistence farming is a situation where a farmer cannot sustain the welfare of one family all year. You go to your villages, you find a lot of them. Feast and famine. At harvest, they're happy. Within a couple of months, weeks, they are exhausted.
They are struggling.
Yes. Then, at some age, which I agree with the previous speaker, after the invention of the steam engine, the world moved on, the rest of the world moved on to mechanized agriculture. That's when they started creating implements, and the focus was on improving agricultural production. And with mechanized agriculture, one farmer can sustain many families all year round. Now that one farmer could handle so many, the rest of the families had to look for something else to do. So that's how vocations started and industrialization began. Much later, we are now, that's the other world I'm talking about, is enjoying technology-driven knowledge economy. Where is Uganda or Sub-Saharan Africa in this continuum? I'm saying that a significant portion of our population is still engaged in subsistence farming. Cut another way, I've devised this schematic that shows the industrial revolutions, and again, my friend did really a good job of explaining. Yes, he really did a good job of explaining these things. And the date I have for the mechanization of agriculture is actually 1784. And mechanization of agriculture followed by harnessing water power, steam power, and so on. About 1870, as the other speakers said, they started, the rest of the world started mass production, assembly line means of production, and so on. Now, assembly line production, I can show you, I can illustrate a very simple example. I can import a coffee table from Malaysia at a very exorbitant price. If you go to Banda here, you'll see coffee tables that are even better looking than those from Malaysia. But what is the likelihood that that coffee table from Banda, when you get it home, it will have all the 4 legs the same length? You start looking for something, anchor one of them. And that is, that's a consequence of doing piecemeal production rather than assembly line approach, where you can guarantee homogeneity, can guarantee quality, and so on. By 1969, when I was enjoying myself in Russia, the computer age had started, as the other man talked about. And now we are talking the fourth industrial revolution. Now, why did I declare at the beginning that we're not ready? If you look at that, that continuum, have we really embraced the first industrial revolution? Ask yourself that. Because when they were mechanizing agriculture, we have a situation where MPs are importing hoes to buy votes. If you can't make a hoe at this stage, really, reality check. And so, when I see pictures like this was in the Uganda division about 2 years ago. And if you look at that, it sobers you up that out of 189 countries, Uganda ranks at 159. And the whole region is not doing any better. Look at Kenya, ranking at 143 out of 189 countries. Reality check, ladies and gentlemen.
Global ranking.
Yeah. So, if you look at why is this all happening, it's because we are not developing viable enterprises. Now, human capital, when you train people and they come out as theoretical scientists and engineers, they are not going to help you very much in developing industry. And then affordable financing. If those three are in place, then you can meet market demands. Then in terms of skills again, I was using for teaching material science processing. Now when you're trained through a place like that, a workshop like that, how do you compare with somebody who picks the same degree out of a lecture room? That's a big difference. For 4IR are there listed. So when I say we are not ready, what do I mean? Where do you know, which institutions do you know are addressing these skills? We have a challenge. And so they create viable enterprises by enhancing use of appropriate technology, by training people so that they have the capacity to contribute to industrial outputs, and of course create affordable financing.
Thank you.
Yes. And next time you want to do comparison, look at where we are and where we were vis-a-vis South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on. And then you can see what a bad, sad situation we're in. But it can be done so long as you focus on those inputs. And entrepreneurship is also very important. I can have a sidebar to discuss that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And we are talking of innovating and moving into the fourth, that is already happening with the rest of the globe that have very huge GDPs. I mean, I don't, it is up to us to know the total GDP of Africa, for example. Now, we don't have capacity to compete globally and economically, because all we are talking here is economics. I mean, industrial revolution is economics, is money. So we don't have capacity, and no one is answering the question of how. Because Uganda in its little economy as it is, Kenya the other side, and so we need to collaborate, or in other words, talking about unity now, so that as a continent, so that we have meaningful economic integration, so that as a continent, we can now negotiate with the rest of the globe. Because we are talking of doing the same things that the United States, which has a GDP of over or about 25 trillion USD, with us, whose GDP is just money used to buy, Elon used to buy a Twitter, the app. So I think there is need to address the question of economic integration, to amass capacity, to now work as a continent. But in the little scattered economies that we have, As he says, we are going to admire, we shall be users, we shall be used. Right now, those big farmers and the big techs are harvesting data from Africa to further enslave us by providing the solutions we need in the health sector. Go to the, for example, NIRA here is partly funded by World Bank. Who knows why? So, I think the issue of the economics, because well, we can have the knowledge, but can we? The country passed a budget that we can't fund even half of it. And we are talking of affordable, accessible finances. So we cannot be failing to pay civil servants and we want to compete in
global village.
Some of these. So there is a big problem.
Competition in the global village.
While I agree with the rest of what was said, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm called Chomendo Selevan, a student of Bachelor's of Science with Education at Makerere University. I'm in my second year. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that Africa is not prepared for the fourth industrial revolution. It might be Africans will just act as slaves or just consumers of the fourth industrial revolution. That's maybe the only way. Because as we talk right now, we are using cell phones. But the cell phones that we are using, we are not manufacturing them ourselves, and yet we have all the necessary minerals. The other issue is the education system. And the biggest problem with our education system is the language of instruction. However, most people have not identified that, the language of instruction. Right now I'm studying chemistry, but as I study chemistry, when it comes to the time of evaluation, what I fail is the language. I don't fail chemistry. In real sense, when I go to the laboratory, I can do things. But when they set the exam, they just need the theory. And what they fail sometimes is the language. Because it's hard to do things and reason in a foreign language. But if we had all that sense in our language, it would be easy. Some people say that it's difficult, that our language have few grammar and the rest, but they managed to translate papers to all those languages. Why can't they translate scientific books to our languages? The other point is in this form of government, the capitalism form of government, it's very hard for us as Africans to develop. In this capitalism form of government, the fact is that Africans have surrendered. We are just consumers. We have surrendered that we can't do anything, and yet we have the capacity. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by saying that some people talked about history. We have a saying that a man without history has no future. If we don't have history, if we don't know our history, then we have no future.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chomendo.
Thanks so much.
To me, I look at a lion being caged, a lion and a goat being caged in the same cage, and they say, you are equal, so please stay together. The lion and the goat. This is Africa and the rest of the world. You said it very well here. If Africa must compete in the fourth industrial revolution, Mr. Uhuru, African government must start to think, Uhuru, why are you struggling with your app for over 5 years alone as an individual? Yet, when you prosper, you employ other Ugandans. When you make the money, the first person who comes for part of that money is the tax. Government has come for your tax. Follow this debate tomorrow at 4 p.m. on NBS TV. I thank you so much for those of you who have been here physically at Fairway, and those of you who have been following us on our online social media platforms. I sign out. My name is Andrew Irumba Katsabi.